Okay, welcome back. Today we're going to continue the topic from last week, was the part two of Sigulat Israel, the uniqueness of the nation of Israel. And we saw this is kind of like a function of the image of God, right? We already studied previously what is the meaning of this image of God. And then we saw that it's not something that's genetic. It's not passed down automatically from generation to generation. Adam himself didn't pass it down to all of his sons. Out of his sons, we know for sure that Cain did not have Selem Elohim. And there's a debate whether Hevel had it or not. According to Maimonides, Hevel didn't have it. According to the Biuda Halevi, Hevel did. And then when he died, Shet was the next one to have Selem Elohim. All right, and then we saw the evolution of the Selem Elohim over time. So the first period of time in history is being passed down from generation to generation to individuals at most, sometimes even skipping a generation. And the only way to acquire this image of God, this Selem Elohim, is through education. You have to be properly educated by somebody who does. And then we reached Abraham, right? Abraham, he had Selem Elohim. He was educated by his grandfather Ever. His father Terach did not have Selem Elohim. And his sons, he had Ishmael, and he had Yitzhak. Yitzhak had Ishmael, was sent away from Eretz Israel because the land of Israel is it's intended for prophecy. Only people who are capable of reaching this level of prophecy are deserving to be here. And so if you don't have Tselem Elohim, then it's a waste for you, for this land to be given to you. So he sent away Ishmael, and then Yitzhak had two sons, right? He had Yaakov and Esav. Esav was also sent away, and Yaakov had 12 sons. And for the first time in history, we see this image of God, this Tselem Elohim, being applied on an entire community. And Yaakov ensured this by appointing one of the sons, Levi, or the tribe of Levi. It's not just Levi, but all of his descendants later on are in charge of the education of the rest of the family / nation, in order to ensure that this image of God stays, continues to grow within this community, and it doesn't go back to just individuals. All right, and then we saw, however, right, Yaakov Avinu limed banav kulam, right, he educated all of his sons. V'hivdil Levi u'minav rosh, and he took Levi aside and put him in charge of teaching everyone. Right? It says, "V'ne'eset ba'olam ummah shehi yoda'at et Hashem." And then there's a nation. There's a nation being forged in the world, a nation that knows God, that has this knowledge of God, that has this image of God. Ad she'archu hayamim le'Yisrael b'Mitzrayim. Right? However, over the years in Egypt, they were there for many, many years, started learning from the Egyptians. They started to learn the Egyptians' behaviors, and also to practice pagan practices, pagan religion, just as the Egyptians did. Everybody except for the tribe of Levi, who did not participate in this intermingling with the rest of the Egyptian crowd, and learning from their bad deeds and learning from their pagan beliefs. ומעולם לא עבד שבט לוי עבודה זרה. And the tribe of Levi never did avodah zarah. They never practiced pagan religion. וכמעט כת היה העיקר ששתל אברהם לעיקר, וחוזרים בני יעקב לטעות העולם ותהיותיהן. Right? And this establishment that Yaakov Avinu did, where for now there is an entire nation that knows God, almost completely disintegrated, because everyone was being mixed into the Egyptian society, learning from their bad deeds, learning from their pagan ideas, and being taken away, driven away from God. ומאהבת השם אותנו ומשומרו את השבועה לאברהם אבינו עשה משה. Right? Out of God's love to us and out of his and due to his oath that the promise he made to Abraham that his descendants will be a nation unto God. So it says Asa Moshe, he created or he prepared Moshe, a special individual, Rabbenu, right? Our master, our teacher, V'Rabban shel kol hanevi'im u'shlacho, and the master of all the prophets, the teacher of all the prophets, and he sent him to us to deliver us from this evil society and make a nation under God. Kivan shenitnaba Moshe Rabbeinu, right? And Moshe Rabbeinu, he prophesied and he came to the Jewish people. Ubahar Hashem Yisrael Ninachala, and God chose the Jewish people as his legacy, as his portion. Ichtiran b'misvot v'hodiam derech avudatu. Says he crowned them in misvot and he instructed them the way to properly worship God. By the way, what is avodah zarah? Avodah zarah isn't just like some sort of pagan ritual. All pagan ritual is avodah zarah. But the simplest understanding of what avodah zarah is anything that is not derech avodato, that not the prescribed way of worshiping God. Any form of worship of God for the sake of worshiping God that wasn't prescribed by God himself is avodah zarah. What does avodah zarah mean? Zar means foreign. It means a foreign worship. Foreign worship being any worship that God did not ask you to do. Say, I want to worship God this way. Well, then that's an avodah of yourself. You're doing what you want to do, not what God's asking you or requiring you to do. But in order to ensure this image of God within the Jewish nation, something unique took place. He didn't just teach us the Torah. He says, Hichtiran b'misvot. This is an interesting term. He says he crowned them with misvot. He didn't just give them misvot and teach us how to worship him. He says, Hichtiran b'misvot. And what took place over there in Ma'amad Har Sinai was such a traumatic event that kind of stuck with us forever. To the point where the Hachamim, they have this midrash, which we're going to study. We're going to study this midrash, we're going to analyze it, and it's going to teach us a lot about the nature of this Tselem Elohim. But so let's see what it says. This is Vahi Bayom HaShelishi. We're back in Shemot, right? Perashat Yitro. Before we receive the 10 Commandments, it says Vahi Bayom HaShelishi. On the third day, Bihiyot HaBoker, right? It's morning. This is the morning of the 6th of Sivan, Vahi kolot uvrakim ve'anan kaved al. It says, and there's many loud noises. There's lots of lightning, and there's this huge, this thick fog that's coming down on the mountain. V'kol shofar hazak meod, and this really, really strong sound of the shofar. Vayiherad kol ha'am asher b'machaneh. Says in the entire nation, right there at the camp, they are trembling. Vayiherad kol ha'am asher b'machaneh. ויוצא משה את העם לקראת האלוהים מן המחנה ויתייצבו בתחתית ההר. Says, and Moshe, he brought the people out towards God from the camp, meaning they're coming up from the camp towards the Mount Sinai, before the presence of God, where all of this is taking place. It says, ויתייצבו בתחתית ההר. Says, which literally means that they stood erect at the bottom of the mountain. והר סיני עשן כולו מפני אשר ירד עליו השם באש, right? And the whole mountain is full of smoke because God came down on it with fire. ויעל עשנו כעשן הכבשן. It says, and the smoke came up from the fire. It was like, you could think of it like as if it was like a volcano, with the tremendous fog coming out of it, these really thick pillars of fog. Vayiherad kol hahar me'od. Says, and the entire mountain trembled. Vayikol hashofar holech v'chazek me'od. And the sound of the shofar is going and it's getting stronger and stronger and stronger. Moshe daber v'ha'elohim ya'anenu b'kol. Moshe speaks to the people, he speaks to God, and God responds to him with the sound of this shofar, this tremendous shofar. So the Torah itself describes like a very traumatic event. And I guess this description wasn't traumatic enough for the Chachamim. And they took this pasuk over here, they took it out of its literal interpretation, and they said, "Vayityasevu betachtit ahar." What does it mean that they stood at the bottom, at the foot of Mount Sinai? Betachtit ahar literally means at the bottom. It says, "Vayityasevu betachtit ahar." This is Masechet Shabbat in the Talmud. Amar Rav Abdimi bar Hama bar Hassa, right? Rav Abdimi, he says, "Melamed shekafa HaKadosh Baruch Hu alehem et ahar kegigit." What does it mean that they stood at the bottom of Mount Sinai? It says, no, they didn't stand at the bottom of Mount Sinai. They stood underneath Mount Sinai. It says, God ripped out the mountain and held it over their head like it was some sort of bowl, right? This bowl over it, and he flips it over so it has like the shape of a mountain, and he's holding it over their head. Ve'amar lahem, and he said to them, Im atem mekablim Torah mutav. Says, if you accept the Torah, all is great between us. Great, amazing. Says, ve'im lav, but if not, sham tehe kivuratchem. Says, there shall be your grave. Right, so it's this huge traumatic event. He's ripping out the mountain, holding it literally over their heads. And it seems like he's threatening us. Do you accept the Torah or not? He says, if you accept the Torah, all right, we can continue. If not, I'm letting go of the mountain and goodbye. At least that's how most people understand this midrash. Amar Rav Aha bar Yaakov Michan Muda'a Rabba Le'oraita. And then Rav Aha comes along and he says, from here we see this great, the truth is we don't really understand this term properly. Muda'a Rabba Le'oraita says like this great announcement of the Torah, whatever that means. Amar Rava. And then Rava comes along and he says, Afal Pichen, says, even so, even so what? Even so, seemingly we were threatened to at gunpoint to accept the Torah. He says, Hador kibeluha b'mei Hashverosh. He says the generation in the times of Ahashverosh, the times of Esther, of Purim, says they accepted it willingly. Dichtiv kimu v'kibelu haYehudim kiyemu ma shekibelu. Says that it says at the end of Megillat Esther that the Jews accepted and practiced, right? What's it like the Megillah and the Torah along with it? So he says they practiced what they received, what they already accepted, meaning seemingly up until now, right? Esther, after the destruction of the first temple, before the rebuilding of the second temple, you could understand from this midrash that we were forced into accepting the Torah, and we kind of only practiced it reluctantly until the times of Purim. From then on, we accepted it upon ourselves. All right, that's a standard understanding of the midrash. All right, so the Chachamim, they really take it like a step further. This traumatic event of Har Sinai. What are your feelings about this? Anybody? You come across a midrash like this, what do you think?
Now, that we didn't took it upon ourselves like by our own free will, that we said, okay, we will do, and then we will learn, understand. So if it's in this case, it's totally forced upon us because nobody wanted Har Sinai on his head, and be dead.
By the way, also, we have a law that says that, a contract that was entered, under pressure is annulled, it's canceled.
Yeah.
Right?
So maybe, so maybe therefore also, when all those people, when we didn't want to enter Israel, our land, when we were in the desert,
right.
Because we didn't really accept the Torah. Otherwise, we would have gone to the land. So
all right, but is this interpretation of the Midrash really acceptable? It completely voids the contract between the Jewish people and God.
Yeah.
Right?
For me, it's
our entire first course, the whole premise of our first semester, the introduction to the oral law, is that everything needs to be mutually accepted. Nothing in Jewish law has any validity if there wasn't mutual consent by both parties. And this midrash, seemingly at least, completely destroys that. All right, so this can't be the meaning of the midrash. He also says, says you can't completely change the literal meaning of the Torah using a midrash, and it's very explicit in the Torah. They said, na'aseh v'nishma, we're going to accept the words of God. The Torah goes into lots of detail describing the back and forth between Moshe and the people. God presenting his proposal to Moshe, Moshe taking it to the people responding, and then Moshe taking it back to God. So what does any of this mean? Okay, well, I guess due to the description of the Midrash, says, well, if God's holding a mountain over your head, we take that to be scary, right? So first of all, it was scary. But what is the meaning of kafa alehem et ahar kegigit? He says kafa Oh, by the way, another reason why people take this so out this way is the word kafa could literally mean coerced or forced. But he didn't say kafa alehem et Torah. He didn't like force the Torah on them. Kafa et ahar. So the other meaning of kafa is to just overturn. That you have a glass here and you flip it over and you cover something with it. That's kafa. Kafa keni. So what is the meaning of doing that? Well, that's also something that's actually well defined in halakha. What's the purpose of doing something like that? So if you go to Pirusha Mishnayot, this is a Mishnah, it says, Hine im kafa echad me'elu hakelim al pihen be'ohel hamed etzilo kol ma shetachtav. He says, okay, we have a law. If someone passes away in a room, everything in that room becomes tameh. It now has tumat metim on it. However, if let's say you have a big bowl, let's say you have something in the room that you can't move, and you can't, you don't want it to be contaminated. You don't want it to get tumah because let's say it's been dedicated to the mikdash. So it's fruits that you can only take to the mikdash and eat over there. And you want to save it from not becoming tameh. If you take a bowl, a big bowl, and you flip it over, and you cover the food underneath it, right, before the person passes away, it says it protects everything that's under it. It says, "Hetzilu kol ma shetachtav." And then it kind of makes, like, it's called an ohel hamet, like the room where a person died in, where there's a dead person, and it makes a room within a room. And if there was like a tent or a room within another room, and the external room became contaminated, whatever's inside the internal ohel, the smaller one, does not get tumah, and it stays pure. However, this cannot be done with ceramic. So you could use a plastic bowl, a glass bowl, a wooden bowl, but you can't use one made of ceramic. שהוא אם קפא כלחרס על פיו לא יציל מה שתחתיו לפי שהוא יטמע דרך פתחו באמת. Right, so if you cover something with a ceramic bowl, it doesn't help. It's like pottery, it doesn't help. Wait a minute, so Kadosh Baruch Hu just ripped out the mountain. It says, and it wasn't like, it was hollow. The mountain would have been hollow because it's like a gigit. A gigit literally means a very big bowl. And so he flipped that over, so it's hollow inside, and he's covering the people underneath it. What's the point of doing that? Well, the point of flipping a bowl over something else is to protect that something else, whatever's underneath it. So he's coming to protect the people. However, what's the mountain made out of?
Ceramic.
If anything, you think it would be made of ceramic. So our whole argument falls. They're out in the desert. Right? What do they have? So Yonatan ben Uziel, one of the earliest translators of the Torah, back in the time of the Tanaim, right? So he actually translated this pasuk over here, incorporating the midrash into the pasuk, as if that's the actual translation of the pasuk. So what does he say? He says, "Ve'anpek Moshe yat amma likadmot shechimta Adonai min mashrita." He says, and Moshe took out the people, right? Doesn't want to say in front of God because God has no actual locality and presence. He was very, very careful to keep away from anything that could personify God or make God seem like he has some sort of physical being. So he says, and he brought it before the Shekhinah, right? The splendor that God was displaying. He says, and Mare Alma is the master of the world, God. He says he ripped out the mountain. Talish Mare Alma Tevara Uskafe Ba'avira. He says, and he held it up in the air. Vehavezayin Ke'aspaklaria. He says, and it was clear, it was transparent, like a mirror, like a glass window. And they all stood underneath this mountain, like God ripped out. So it says, so God ripped out the mountain. He held it over their heads. Was it made of ceramic, Sarah?
I lost the thought.
So you would think maybe it's made of ceramic because they're in the desert and it's made of dirt. It says no, something else is made of dirt or made of sand. And that's glass. So he goes that extra step to say, no, by the way, God, if he's coming to protect us, he's using a glass mountain. Right? Remember, it came down, God came down with fire and brimstone on the mountain. He burnt the mountain, turned it into glass. And he held that over them. And glass does protect. However, the term aspaklaria, or a glass, is used in the Midrashim as a code term for something else. It says, הרבה יימצא במדרשות ובאגדות, ויש מהן בגמרא. Says we'll find many times this term aspaklaria, right? Many times the Hachamim, whether in the Talmud or in the Midrashim, right? They say sheyesh min haneviim mishirei Hashem yitbarach ma'achorei mechisot rabbot. Says that the prophets, some of the prophets, they perceive God from behind many barriers. And some of them will see him behind few barriers. So depending on their level. All dependent on their level, their closeness to God, and the level of their prophecy. Right? So some will see many barriers between them and God, and some few. Ad she'amru, until they said, Moshe Rabbeinu alav hashalom ra'a Hashem yitbarach ma'achorei mechisa achat behira. Says to the point where the highest level, that of Moshe, his prophecy, he was able to perceive God behind one barrier, and this barrier was transparent. Omar mazhira hu omram. And this is what they said, Histakel be'aspaklaria ha'me'ira. Says, when they said that Moshe viewed God behind one transparent barrier, the term that they used was, he viewed God through, I'll even use like the similar term, through a transparent spectacle. This is what is an aspaklaria. The actual literal meaning of the word aspaklaria is like something that's transparent, that could be made of of diamond or of glass. As we discussed at the Masechet Kenim, and we're talking about different types of tools. So what does this mean? And this is, I'm going to explain to you what this means, that he saw, or that the prophets perceive God behind different barriers. והוא שאנחנו באנו בפרק שני שהמעלות מהן מעלות שכליות ומהן מעלות המידות. Says I already explained to you in the second chapter. This is the second chapter of his introduction to Pirkei Avot, known as the 8 chapters. This is the 7th chapter. He says, in the second chapter, when I was explaining to you the nefesh and how it works, I said there are many different types of virtues that a person can have. There are 2 types. There's intellectual virtues, as a person could be, learn quickly, understand things quickly. And it says, umehen ma'alot midot, and there's also virtues, characteristic virtues. All right, and he says, in order to be a prophet, or in order to be a perfected person, you really need to perfect all of these virtues. And so too, what's the opposite of a virtue? Like your bad characteristics. And also maybe someone who, is not too bright. Mehen behituyot sichliyot, some of them could be intellectual, besichlut umiut havana, someone who is ignorant, someone who doesn't understand, v'dohak hatevuna, umehen behituyot hamidot, and so too characteristic issues. Kirova ta'ava, haga'ava, like someone who has a lot of pride, someone who's always angry, azut, right? Someone who has chutzpah, a lot of chutzpah. So all of these are negative characteristics. Ve'ahavat hamamon ve'adome lahem, and greed, and so on and so on. Vehen rabot me'od, and there's many of them. וכבר זכרנו הסדר בידיעתם בפרק הרביעי, and I already explained them in depth in the 4th chapter, right? ואילו הפחיתויות כולן הן מחיסות המבדילות בין האדם ובין השם יתברך, right? And so this is all of these negative characteristics, whether they're part of your character or intellectual, these are the barriers between man and God. And this is what the prophet Ishaya says, Ki im avonotechem hayu mavdilim benechem leben Elohechem. He says, your avonot, your sins, your bad behaviors, these are the things separating you from your God. Yomar she'avonotenu v'hem elu haraot, right? So our avonot, these are these deficiencies in our intellect and or character. These are the barriers, the curtains, dividing or separating us from God. Meaning, so the more you progress, the more you study, the more you understand, the more you perfect your character, the more of these barriers you're taking down, you're getting rid of. וכאשר ידע משה רבנו עליו השלום שלא נשארה לו מחיסה שלא הסיר אותה, and when Moshe Rabbeinu reached the level that he knows that he already overcame all of these barriers, right? He already perfected his character as much as a person can, and he perfected his intellect as much as a person can. Right? And he perfected already all of his characteristic traits, and all of his intellectual traits. ביקש להשיג מהות השם יתברך על אמיתת מסיעותו אחר שלא נשאר לו מונע ואמר הראני נא את כבודך. So that's when Moshe turned to God and he said, I want to understand you as you are, perfectly. And that's when he said, show me your glory. And God responded to him. You remember what God responded to him? Who remembers what God responded?
Man cannot see Hashem directly, only by the.
Right. Says God, he says you can't. He says, Lo yirani ha'adam v'hai. A person cannot perceive me, or a living person cannot perceive me. Hodio, Hashem yitbarach she'i efshar lezeh. God told them that this is impossible. Bihiyoto sechel nimsa b'homer. Right? Because he is an intellect that is confined within physical boundaries. He is limited. Meaning, just by virtue of being man, being human, this is impossible. This is what God responded, right? Man cannot perceive me while alive. על אמיתת מסיעותו, אלא מחיסה אחת בהירה. Says, so there was no other barrier left between Moshe and God except for this one transparent barrier. And that is the human intellect, which is confined within physical boundaries. We call it the limited human intellect. And this is what the Chachamim refer to as Moshe viewing God, Yistaken be'aspaklaria ha'me'ira, viewing God through this transparent spectacle. And this is what Yonatan ben Uziel says was this mountain that God held over us. So God ripped out this mountain and he used it as a kind of like telescope or spectacle, this way, this window into the heavens, so to speak, so that man can perceive God behind a transparent barrier. Right? And it was transparent like a crystal or like glass. So what does that do for us? What is God protecting us from under Mount Sinai? And how does viewing him give us that protection? Basically, what Yonatan ben Uziel is saying, once we understand the meaning of Aspaklaria, is that God prophesied to all of us, which is what we saw earlier, right? Last week, that's Sefer Kuzari says, the Yehuda Halevi, when he's talking to the king of Kuzar, and he says that they all reached, right, the entire nation reached this level of prophecy. This level of prophecy, meaning this level of viewing / communicating with God. They all became prophets. The men, the women, the children, all of them. And this Midrash comes to explain, basically, one thing, that God prophesied the entire nation, meaning they all reached this pinnacle of human development, of image of God, being able to view God, and two, that this prophecy has come to protect them. What's it protecting them from? Any ideas?
From dying, like he said to Moshe.
From what? Sorry?
Sorry?
What did you say? Protect them
from dying, like he said to Moshe, nobody can see God and the rest alive.
All right, but then that would mean that whoever's not under this mountain is dying. Because remember, he's coming to protect whatever's under the mountain from something that is affecting everyone that's not under this mountain.
Not being Jewish.
What's the protection there, though? So this is towards the end of the book of Sefer HaKuzari of Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi. Again, he's talking to the king of Kuzar, and he says, "Achen יכולים הם הפילוסופים להתנצל, כי הוזקקו להיקשים ההגיוניים." He says the philosophers, right? They perfected philosophy, they perfected logic, they perfected, intellectual thinking. They're really good at it, right? And they have a good excuse for that. Why did they need to perfect logic so much? Why couldn't they just know? Ho'il ve'en imam nevuah ve'lo or Elohim. It says because they have no prophecy. Nobody in Greece ever received a prophecy from God. And they don't have this divine light. In other words, what's the divine light? The image of God. They don't have it. על כן הביאו את החוכמות המופתיות לתכלית השלמות. Says therefore they needed to perfect the חוכמות המופתיות is the ways of proving a point, right? Logic. They needed to perfect logic as much as possible. והתמסרו להן בכל נפשם, and they dedicated themselves completely to this quest of perfecting logic for the sake of philosophy, of trying to understand the world. בחוכמות ההן אין חילוקי דעות בין שני אנשים, right? However, in science, you almost, once something is settled in science, there's almost no dispute among the scientists about it, right? No one's going to say the hydrogen atom has an atomic mass of 1, and another one's going to say no, it's an atomic mass of 5, and they're going to have all these disputes about no. Everyone agrees it's 1, and carbon is 6, right? So when it comes to mathematics and physics, there's almost no dispute among the scientists. This is le'omadze. However, opposed to that, אין כמעט כל הסכמה בין שני אנשים בעניינים אשר מעבר לחוכמות אלה. Right? However, there is almost no agreement among any of the philosophers or any of the scientists or the more meta scientists on what comes beyond their scientific understanding, right? The metaphysics, the masha'ahar hateva, what comes beyond nature. ואף הרבה מחוכמות הטבע, אם תמצא כת אנשים מסכימים לדעה אחת, אין זה בגלל חקירה שחקרו או מסקנה שהגיעו, כי אם קבלה היא שקיבלו כסיעה מאת פילוסוף אחד. All right, if you find a group of people agreeing on what we call the metaphysics, or we'll call it the divine sciences, right, or philosophy, says it's not because they all reach the same conclusion. It's usually because they're all the students of the same school or same teacher. It says when it comes to science, you can prove it all. You can prove mathematics. You show an equation, you demonstrate, that's it, done. When it comes to matters of faith, what we consider today faith and religion, and or the metaphysics, the meta sciences, over there's almost no agreement among the philosophers or the wise men. which is the cause of tremendous doubt. It says all this is because they have no prophecy. They don't have this divine light. It says Ulam anahnu, however us, מחויבים להאמין בכל אשר ראו עינינו. Says we have to believe, acknowledge what we experienced. Says when we stood at the foot of Sinai and God spoke to us, there's no debate anymore if God exists or not. We experienced it ourselves on our flesh. And in a tradition, right, that's passed down like a testimony from generation to generation, from court to court. So when God is holding the mountain over us, prophesying the Jewish people, he's saying, Anochi Adonai Elohecha, I am God your Lord. And everybody heard it, everybody understood it. Lo yeh lecha Elohim achirim, says you will have no other God other than me. That's not something that needs a logic proof. It's an experience. The rest of the world who wasn't there did not experience this. It says, Pataha Barashon Hazeh, something else about Ma'aman Har Sinai, how tremendous this and how traumatic this experience was. In Tehillim, David HaMelech says, Alita lamarom shavita shevi. Says it's describing Moshe going up to the heavens. It says you went up to the heavens, shavita shevi. Says you took a hostage, or you took hostages. Lakachta matanot ba'adam, and you took presents or loot for man. Or ba'adam actually means in man. What does that mean? There's Amar Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. בשעה שעלה משה למרום עמדו המלאכים להורגו. Says Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says when Moshe went up to the heavens, all the angels came to kill him. He says this isn't your place, this isn't a place for man. אמר לה בשביל שני דברים שנתנו לי מן השמיים אתם רוצים להורגני והניחוהו. Says Moshe respond, because of two things that I received from the heavens. You want to kill me? So what are these two things? These two things, or devarim, are the two diberot that the Chachamim say all of Israel heard and understood. It says Alita Marom, he says you went up to heavens. And by the Chachamim, other midrashim, they describe this epic battle between Moshe and the Malachim. Another rendering of the Midrash describes an epic dispute or discussion between Moshe and the Malachim, meaning this battle was like an intellectual battle that he had. And maybe we'll get more into that when we study, if we study Midrashim regarding the tree of knowledge and the tree of life. I'll just hint to the protection around the tree of life. All right, so he had this epic battle with the Malachim. And he says, and you brought back a hostage, the hostage is the Torah. You brought back the Torah, Shavita Shevi, that's how the Chachamim understand it. But there was something else. Lakachta matanot ba'adam. You took presents for man, or for the sake of man, or within man. And the Midrash in the Talmud Yerushalmi, in the Jerusalem Palestinian Talmud, says, Be'ota sha'a amar David, שלוש מתנות טובות נתן הקדוש ברוך הוא לישראל. What are these presents? David says, at that moment, Akadosh Baruch Hu gave the nation of Israel three presents, three good presents. What are they? Rahmanim, they're merciful. Baishanim, they're humble. And Gomle Hasadim is that they do good deeds, one with the other. It says Rahmanim minayin. How do we know that they're merciful? V'natan lecha rahamim v'nihamecha. Says God gave you mercy, and then He had mercy on you. V'natan lecha rahamim v'nihamecha. So He gave you mercy, and then He had mercy on you. It says Baishani minayin. What does it mean? Humble. It says Ba'avur tiyeh yira'ato al penechem. And this is a pasuk taken out of Ma'amad Har Sinai. He says, why did He do all this with pillars of smoke and lightning and the shofar and this tremendous, terrible, traumatic experience that we had? He says, Ba'avur, for the sake, tiyeh yira'ato al penechem, that you shall fear, or the fear of God will be on you. It says, Zeh siman baishan she'eno choteh. Right? This is a sign, a characteristic of a humble person who doesn't sin. V'chol she'eno boshet panim, and anyone who doesn't have humility, right, because doesn't understand this chasm between man and God, davar bari she'lo amdu avotav al har Sinai. Says it's very likely that his ancestors weren't there on Sinai. It says anybody who was there, who experienced that, has this humility with regards to man, with regards to God. And how do we know that they also received this present of doing good deeds one with the other? It says V'shamar Adonai Elohecha lecha et haberit ve'et hachesed, right? Ve'ilu en bahem achad mehem yad rechakam. All right, so we're standing at under this tremendous event on Har Sinai. God is prophesizing, man. He says, He gave us the Torah, right? The Shavit Hashevi, Lekachta matanot ba'adam. He says, these presents that you took, it says ba'adam, within man. It says you take these presents within man. And what are these presents? These presents are characteristics, the part of a person's character. Right? What is the cornerstone of having the image of God is perfecting your character. So when God wants to protect us from this possible kafirah heresy that's going around the world, people are confused, they don't know what to believe. 90% of the world are pagan, and they believe in all sorts of magic and all sorts of conjuring and following all sorts of committing, or they don't believe in anything, complete atheists. So God comes down, He takes the Jewish nation out of Egypt, and He wants to make sure that there's this nation that always has the image of God. And He makes this traumatic event that kind of ingrains certain characteristic traits that are the basis of the image of God. It says, V'hakiti, says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, B'sha'ah sheba nachash al Hava yitil ba zuhama. Says when the serpent came on Hava, he put poison into her. Says Israel shamdu al Har Sinai paska zuhamatan. right? But the Jewish people who stood under Har Sinai, right, they were cured from this poison. It says Ovdei Kochavim, says the pagans shelo amdu behar Sinai, who weren't in Har Sinai, lo paskaz hamatan, says they never had that antidote injected into them. It says Har Sinai itself was the antidote to this doubt, this kefirah, does God exist? Does he not exist? Right? We study, we perfect our intellect, we use logic, we use science, but we don't need it in order to feel the presence of God. That's what Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi refers to as an intuitive knowledge. We have an intuitive knowledge of God. It says in Masechet Avodah Zarah, it says, "Vayomer Hashem Sinai ba v'zarach miSeir lamo." It says God came from Sinai and he shone on Seir. Uktiv Eloah miteman yavo. And there's another pasuk that says God came from the south or from Yemen. It says Mai ba'e Seir or Mai ba'e Paran. It says why does it specify Seir and Paran and Teman and all these other places? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, maybe you're familiar with this midrash. Rabbi Yochanan says, "Melamed shechizira Kadosh Baruch Hu al kol umma velashon velo kibbeluha." He says we learn from this that before God presented the Torah to us, he went around all of the nations of the world and he said, "Do you want to accept this Torah?" And they all turned him down. Until he came to the nation of Israel and they accepted it. So then they come, the nations, they come, oh, well, how do you call it? So they accepted it, but they didn't always fulfill it. So why are you coming to us, complaining to us? The Jewish people accepted it and didn't always follow it. So we never accepted it. And so this is what they say to him. It says, even the Jewish people, kivyachol, they didn't necessarily accept it. It says, Klum kifita alenu har kigilgit velo kibalnua kmo she'asita liYisrael. It says, how are you coming to us complaining that we didn't accept the Torah? It says, well, you didn't force it, you didn't overturn it over our heads like a protective shield as you did for the nation of Israel. As it says, so Serem Elohim, right, this image of God, is not something that is it's not genetic. You need to be educated. You need to perfect your character in order to get it. And Yaakov tried to make sure that his descendants always have it by appointing Levi. However, during their exile into Egypt, and who knows what would have happened after 2,000-year exile all over the world, what could have happened? God realized this in Egypt, and he took them out, and he caused this really traumatic event to really ingrain this image of God within his chosen people. Remember, the image of God is something anybody can acquire and anybody can lose it. This image of God also, it's not on or off. You either have it or you don't. It's something that needs to be worked on. What we received in Har Sinai was maybe the baseline, the minimum that's needed in order to have this image of God, but something that throughout your whole life, you need to educate yourself. You need to study. You need to further perfect all of your characteristics in order to really rip down as many barriers as possible to reach this level of prophecy or this level of human perfection. Any questions?
Could you explain again this turning of the Mount Sinai? Because as I understand, when the mountain was just uplifted, it was more protection as it was also turned around while the peak was pointing to the people.
No, so the peak would have been upwards, right? Because they're
Yes.
all underneath this glass bowl. And the purpose of that is to protect them from this tumat metim that is outside in the external world around them, or in the pagan world around them. So how is it protecting them from the tumah, right? And we saw later on Midrash talks about this tumah that all of mankind is affected with. And the standing underneath Sinai is kind of providing them with this antidote to this doubt, to this pagan perception of divinity. And that is what we call the image of God.
Okay, thank you very much. And the expression is also like this covering of the people of Israel is like kippah. It's also maybe.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's an interesting. Kippah, like a kafa. Okay.
Okay, so it's right. Still this conception.
I never thought of that. Anyone else? Any other questions? Okay, so there's no more questions. I understand next week there's no class, right?
No class. Yeah. Correct.
Winter break, Hanukkah break.
Hanukkah break. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sami.
All right. Enjoy your Hanukkah, everybody.
You too.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Thank
תודה
you.
רבה, חנוכה שמח.